All right, guys, it's time for the Next Level Guy Show, a men's interview, interest, and improvement-focused podcast featuring interviews with the greats from all industries to help you better your life. Each week, a new episode features an interview with one of the greats, covering all aspects of their story, from life hacks to tips and protocols that have allowed them to live life on the next level. We then highlight concrete action steps that you can use to improve your life. And now, your host, Ian Dawson Mackay.
And today's guest is Elise Micheals. Elise helps her clients heal subconscious trauma, improving the quality of their relationships, lives and businesses. She struggled with her own mental health issues for most of her life and didn't understand why until she took action, and by focusing on trauma therapy, relationship science, neuroscience and therapy, she was able to pinpoint the cycles and behaviours that ultimately always led to her own demise. She healed herself from the inner child out. This led to her becoming happier, healthier, and a version of herself she wanted to be. Now she helps men identify their own issues, heal their subconscious trauma, and connect with their most authentic, spiritual selves. Her methods are rapid, transformative, and unlike any experience you've ever had before. In this interview, we discuss her story, how to identify and tackle your demons, and the mindset hacks to identify the causes, heal the problems, and repeat to help you grow into the man you want to be, and so much more. And now, let's get to the interview. Thank you so much for coming on, Elise. It's an absolute pleasure to have somebody on. I followed on social media. You're an absolute star. You're tackling the big issues that guys are facing. But for people who maybe don't recognize your name, could you give a quick introduction?
Well, thank you so much, Ian. I really appreciate being here. And for anybody who doesn't know me, I am a men's mental health coach, and I help men heal their subconscious trauma so they can find purpose and passion again.
Perfect. Now, something I did notice on your website was you mentioned your own mental health journey, that you kind of had some struggles, you spoke to therapists and stuff like that. Could you go into a little bit about that? Like, what was that the sort of the thing that made you get into coaching and helping others, or was there something else that made you kind of step into the therapy, than helping men with the mindset and mental health?
100% it was my own struggles. I actually didn't do it to become a coach. I did it to just solve my own problems. So as it says, like on my website and my story, I had quite a tumultuous upbringing. And I didn't realize that that leaves you with behavior patterns that carry on for the rest of your life, because I was fine. I was always a happy kid. I always did what I wanted. I was kind of like the black sheep as far as I just didn't do what the rest of my family did. And I was on my own from 18 forward. But when I got in some relationships that just kept falling apart, I realized, like, whatever I'm doing, no matter how much I'm diving into self-development, no matter how much I'm diving into my own learning, it's not helping me at this point. And that's when I got therapy, which really helped me see some different perspectives, but still didn't solve those behavior patterns. And that's when I went into learning trauma therapy, relationship science, neuroscience, tons of stuff about the brain, and realized that a lot of the stuff that I went through was because of childhood, was programming from childhood, and that you can actually rewrite that in a very simple manner. And then at that point, I thought I need to share this with people.
That's a great answer, and it's a very justifiable reason. You are helping so many people. I mean, I've been diagnosed with depression and OCD. Went to the doctor, got the usual, got the tablets. It hides the symptoms, but it doesn't actually deal with the real pain. And then, as I started the podcast, I started interviewing people like, Brent Smith. You can change your story. You can just decide right now, change your life. Spoke to addiction specialists who said, you can have done the worst thing in the world, but you're still valuable. You're still worthy of love. People like I've all these amazing people I've had on, and it made me think about these things, but also deal with my own kind of bullshit or my own conditioning far more, because talking therapy helped me more than going on tablets like antidepressants. And did you find that with a lot of guys, it's the traditional healing modalities kind of just take the edge off, but never tackle the real darkness? They don't shine a light in the things they need to.
100%. You talk to anybody who's, for the most part, I mean, medication does help some people and it totally changes their life around, but I don't think without them also participating in their own action to change. But a lot of people participate in their own action to change and they take the medication and still they're just years later, they're like, yeah, I've been on it for 18 years and they still label themselves as depressive and have anxiety. And you're like, when is it going to start helping? That's because, like you said, it numbs the pain, but it doesn't cure the pain.
Because when I started this show, I wanted to find out how to be a better man in all areas. But every time I looked at what was to be a man, it was you have to be strong, dominant, you have to X, Y, Z. You have to be the man of the relationship. You have to be the dominant one in the family. You have to, all the typical cliche, stereotypical BS. And I remember speaking to Aubrey Marcus, and he was the first one that mentioned about feminine energy in masculine energy, in masculinity, how there was the two energies to it. And as I started listening to all these different people talking about masculinity, it really hit home. We have no idea how to be men because our fathers don't know. We're not taught this at school. And a lot of guys like Andrew Tate and these morons come in and say, you've got to do this, you've got to be strong, you've got to be silent, you've got to be whatever. Why have you noticed a change in the last 10 years now with social media, with coaches like yourself, taking away that stigma and allowing people to be vulnerable? Or are we still following these old stereotypes?
I think there's extremes in both ends. I think that a lot of men's coaches who have become very popular recently, like you mentioned, the Andrew Tates, the red pills, I think that a lot of men are actually emasculating other men because they're perpetuating the old stereotypes and stigmas and then also encouraging them to go this new route like, hey, don't identify yourself as a man from your core values or who you are. Identify yourself as a man by the cars that you drive, the money that you make, how many girls that you can have. That's somehow the new high value man, when actually all they're serving to do is teach men how not to have discipline, how not to have commitment. There's no purpose, there's no passion, there's no mission. So they're being sold this idea of what masculinity is in one direction. And then in another, there's coaches like me who are talking about trauma, talking about childhood wounds, the inner child. And since it seems to have a softer side to it, people don't really want to listen to it, even though that's what will actually solve the problem and help you get in touch with that masculine side that is very strong, that is the leader, that is the dominant one.
And do you find that's a problem? So that when you mention trauma, we automatically assume it's abuse, it's like something serious, it's something like that shakes you to your core values. Whereas it could literally be bullying in primary school, it could be having a single parent and adopting a role of the father, all these kind of, we assumed trauma has to be something really earth shattering, but what is trauma to you that causes these problems, and what kind of outputs do you see? Do you see like poor sleep, poor diet, drinking, dependency to be chasing the wrong kind of people in their lives, that sort of thing?
Well, you just named off so many things, right? That are
Sorry
the
about that. I do that a
the
lot.
symptoms. No, you already know, right? It's kind of like a commercial, right? Well, the scientific definition of trauma is it's the psychological impact of an event, not the event itself. So we've got it misconstrued that it has to be a car accident or murder or abuse of some sort. But like you said, it could be a dog dying or parents divorcing. And you don't have to classify yourself as traumatized to understand that there are going to be behavior patterns that you've learned to survive in childhood because the childhood brain is just looking for love, validation, affection, attention that you've carried into adulthood. So you don't have to say, oh, I'm traumatized. Now I have all these problems that I have to fix myself. Something's wrong with me. You can just say, okay, if my life isn't exactly as I want it in this moment, what things might be adding to that, causing that I can't see that are in my subconscious? And how do I rewrite that and how do I change that?
And do you still find that a lot of men Like, I mean, I've come to thoughts of suicide. I've thought about what's the point of me being here? I'm not this. I'm not that. I'm not married. I don't have kids. It's the traditional what's expected of a man, that you're married by 30, you have kids by your 40. These kind of placeholders of success we put on ourselves. Do you find that guys kind of come to you only when they're about to explode, or has that finally started kind of breaking down? Are guys being a bit more open? Do you, like, are we still struggling to find our place in the world?
100%. Most people only go seek help that is like professional or that is classified as mental health or trauma or something like that when they are at the edge, when it's almost too late, to be honest. Even I did. I didn't go see a therapist until I was like, I cannot continue like this anymore. Like, I need to figure something out. Because most of us try to really be resilient. We try to be self sufficient. And especially men, they're taught to self isolate. Don't ask anyone for help. Don't even tell anybody what you're about to do, right? The whole new trend now is keep quiet for 6 months. Don't tell them what your next move is. Just show up a different person. But how can you
Mm.
possibly show up a different person if you are only getting ideas from the person that you are? You cannot change yourself fundamentally if you don't have somebody else checking your ideals, your beliefs, the way that you do things, or else you're just going to continue to perpetuate your own cycles and end up in the same place.
Because I mean, I know only my own, I hate that phrase, red flags from catching myself and seeing a kind of pattern to my behaviors. But I would have said, yeah, don't be silly. It's just a bit of mess. If you had said, you're being messy again, and that's usually a sign of this, you're not working out, that's a sign that you're slipping down. You need to stop and get back on, like, go for walks, go for whatever it is. And now I kind of recognize it. Did you notice your own kind of red flags that were causing the problems? Or, what, how do you get somebody to identify the behaviors, the tipping points? And do you find that because you had your own, you can help people identify theirs better than somebody who's just met them on like one of these better health apps?
I definitely think so. I think having your own personal experience going through something hard, something rough is what helps you connect with others because you feel it on a deeper level. For me, I didn't necessarily have any red flags per se, but my biggest flag was the complete discomfort that I was feeling because for
Mm.
me, and this is actually happens for a lot of men too, everything seemed right. I had a good job. I worked out all the time. I ate healthy. I read the books. I was on a really good trajectory, but like my relationships kept crumbling. And I didn't understand why I was trying so hard and trying so hard and trying so hard. And this is like what a lot of men find themselves in. I guess I had more of a masculine energy growing up because I had to survive, right? So that I could really relate to men. A lot of men are on this trajectory of success. They've got a good job, they've got cars, they get into the relationship, but maintaining something, having consistent happiness, having consistent just peace in their lives is never a theme. They find themselves then falling into this place where they're drinking too much alcohol. They can't get to sleep at night. They can't shut their brain off. They have racing thoughts. They don't really have connections with people. They feel alone. They don't talk about anything. And it just all accumulates into these symptoms that they then, like, you go to the doctor for. And the doctor says, oh, you have anxiety or depression. Like, take these medicines.
Mm.
But it doesn't help because they're still alone. They're still anxious. They still don't know how to connect with someone. And yeah.
Because what's it to say? It's like depression is like wanting to be alone and fear of being alone, but not wanting to actually or able to connect with somebody. It's wanting to sleep, but never sleep because you're afraid you'll never wake up. There's all these kind of. I'm trying to remember. It's about depression, about how it's such a conflicting fight between your personality, and I think a lot of guys struggle with that. I mean, when I had depression at the start, you wouldn't have thought that. I was still turning up for work. I was still shouting. I was still getting dressed and suited and booted. And people are like, "Don't be silly. You're just having a bad mood. Just get on with it. Go have a pint. Come on." There wasn't that kind of acceptance of it. Do you think that's the thing of where, like you're saying, people are just we can see it in other people, but we can't identify our thing. We're not able to kind of self-analyze as such.
Well, I think, like you just said, if other people see it, they're like, ah, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. Go have a pint. You're just having a bad day.
Mm.
So, because the world doesn't necessarily want to accept things like depression or mental health, because it's a little bit scary to accept something like that, right? Like, nobody wants to admit something because it makes it real. And if somebody doesn't know how to deal with something, they don't want to make it real. So your friends aren't making it real, and then you're not making it real. So I think we tend to gaslight ourselves about how we're truly feeling. So we don't want to believe that we would have depression. So you don't think about that until it gets so bad that you can't deny it anymore. But this but I don't think that people should like look for signs of depression as much as they should always try to stay focused on just knowing that they have control in the moment,
Yeah.
and they can always choose to do a different path, because the more you just focus on having depression, the more you're going to train your reticular activation system to look for signs and proof of depression. And what that does is it just trains you to be more depressed, right? And then you end up with 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years of, oh, I've had depression for 25 years. And that's no way to live. We're not meant to live. I don't care what anybody says. We are not meant to live with depression and anxiety. You are not born with depression. You are not born with anxiety. It is not an inherent trait that you just have. Maybe you're more prone to getting it because of the environment. The environment is depressive. The caregivers that you have didn't take care of your needs. But those things can all be changed. We need to give people their power back, that they can change the circumstances that they're in and they don't have to live with it anymore. And that starts with that self identity, like your other guest, you said Brent said. You can change your story.
Yeah, because I mean that was something I definitely noticed was if you start reading up on it, you're like, oh yeah, I've got that, and before you know it, your whole life is just identifying it, and you make yourself worse because you're looking for the signs, the justification of why you're in a, you're feeling depressed, you're feeling down, or it's like a justification. Oh, look, there's something wrong with me, because I definitely lived the repressive mode, and I found plenty of things. And then my brain, because of I have OCD, started saying, "Remember that bad thing you did 15 years ago? Remember that insult you? Let's live that again. Let's talk about that, and let's make you feel worse." Because trauma then is subconscious. How do we identify what's trauma and what's ourselves? Because I didn't know who I was. I'm 41, still probably don't know, to be honest, and I don't know what's now this traumatic version of Ian I've created and what's really Ian. And I used to be able to go out and meet plenty of people. I was told I could meet friends, and no matter what I did, no matter where I went, I could always make new friends, and I could be the life of parties and stuff like that. Now I can't remember how to do that. How do we know then what's a defense mechanism and what's actually part of us and should be retained? How do you start working with somebody to break down the two kind of columns, if you want to call them, of what to keep and what to get rid of?
Right. Well, in my coaching, I try to make everything as simple as possible, right? So I tend to try to say, like, how can we make this as easy as possible? And when it comes to just everyday function, no matter what, 95% of what you're doing is on autopilot.
Yeah.
So instead of saying what's me versus what's not me, assume that all of it is you, and all of it is programming that you just adopted to survive at some point in your life. And we don't have to categorize, is it good, is it bad, is it me, or is it not? I don't like, it's so interesting they say I don't remember how to do that, because you do remember how to do it. You don't just forget how to do things, right? But it's this confusion that we've then put ourselves in of like, what is me versus what is not me? All of it is you. Just because you adopted something from survival doesn't mean it's not you. You learned how to walk from your parents. That doesn't mean you don't suddenly know how to walk now, or walking's not a part of you. Like, we have to be reasonable. So what we say instead is, okay, what parts of my life are going well? What parts of my life do I like? And what parts of my life am I unsatisfied with? What parts of my life would I like to change? That's how we can start creating buckets. Okay, what parts of my life are going good? Why do I like, what skill sets do I have? Do I think contributed to life going well? Okay, this, and this. Okay, what do I think I did to cause the negative things that have happened in my life, or the reason why my life is not going well? That's when you can start separating the buckets. You're taking complete and full responsibility. You're not saying I'm good or I'm bad. You're just analyzing the data, because the only way we can make true change is to analyze the data, not get caught up in the fantasy of anxiety or what depression tells us. We're looking at the data. Where is my life now? What may I have done to cause it? And then we get a third party who has the tools to help us analyze. Oh yes, you do seem to have this pattern in your relationships. You're an anxious or avoidant attachment style. This is how we solve this, right? It can be very logical. It can be step by step.
I love that. I love that way you can kind of lift it back up here, because we kind of go into the nitty gritty of, no, you just don't understand. This is happening to me. This is my, you're like, no. You're just thinking about it down here. You need to just look at what's actually what. And I think that's the thing is we think if it's us and we're down, it's the end of the world. It's life or death. Where you're kind of like, well, no, just these are programs that have come in through your bias, through your training, survival instincts. Now we just need to reprogram. Because I remember speaking to somebody and they were
100%.
saying about your brain being malleable and you can change it. And I was like, what? I thought this was just me. I thought, well, I'm fucked. I'm stuck. And they're like, no, you can change to whenever, because we're told, you're fit till you're 30, then it's a slope downhill. That whatever you do at
Right.
school is you. But people get qualifications and all that all the time. They start new relationships. They have tons of new experiences. Why do we think we can't change then? Why do we think this is our set by the time you're an adult?
Because that's what we've been told. How many people have been told that your brain stops growing at 25? Right? Like
Mhm.
I heard that the whole time growing up, and depending on what environment you grew up in, if you didn't grow up with caregivers who challenge themselves and encourage you to grow and encourage you to do new things, they grew up with what society expected of them too. You have to think we've all been trained to be workers. We've all been trained into a system that makes people the same. I don't want to dive in any conspiracy theories or anything like that, but society runs good as a system. Right? It runs good when everybody kind of goes with the system, goes with the flow.
Yeah.
There's this famous like story where they thought that a mile could not be broken like in 4 minutes or something
Oh,
until someone
Bannister.
actually ran. Yeah, and then they broke that record, and then all of a sudden the next year like 10 people broke the record or something, right? Um, so sometimes we just have to see that something can be different. And that's why I kind of bring people up on a logical level, because that's what my job is. It's my job to understand where you're at, but not to be where you're at, because I can empathize with you, but if I get in the trenches with you and I start crying, and then all of a sudden, we're both struggling here. You need to
Mhm.
see that someone knows exactly where you're at and knows that there's a journey where you can get better, right? It doesn't have to be in the trenches. And you have to understand that when you're sad or when you're happy and that's all you identify with in that moment, that is the lens that you're looking through something with. So, speaking with someone who has a very clear perspective can help give you different tactics, because, yeah, when you're sad or upset or whatever, that's going to narrate the story for you, not logic, not reason.
Because that's why I used to love forums when I was younger, because you could put a thing out and people who weren't there or who didn't know the story could just say, no, that's silly. You do this, do that. Because you, like you're saying, you live that moment, you believe it to be true, it's the end of the world, whatever. And somebody said, like, they can see the data, but from a non-emotional point of view, they can just see the data analysis of it. Something I did wonder was, how do therapists engage with so many clients at such a deep level with such raw and emotional problems and not be affected by it? How do you kind of work with somebody and not feel that kind of, oh, well, I can't believe what I found out today? How do you keep healthy emotionally yourself as a therapist while working with so many clients?
Well, I'm actually a coach. I just have to put that out there. I'm a coach,
Mm.
not a therapist. And I can only speak for myself as being a trauma informed coach, that you learn how to care but not carry, because the best way to help your clients is to remain calm and neutral. And you do that by understanding how to self regulate, right? If you're really trying to help someone, you cannot be thinking too much about where they're at, like at an emotional standpoint. You have to become quite logical about it, because or else then you flip the responsibility of your emotions on them and it completely destroys their ability to get better.
So when guys are coming to you, what are you seeing? Because I know you'll probably see the same similarity in issues, but are they trying to be the hero of the story or the leader of their pack, or what are you kind of seeing? Because I'm assuming that you can look at majority of issues and say, well, I know that person's likely to have come from a single parent family because that's what they're looking for. They have obviously been bullied because they're now looking for this as an indicator of success in their life. Can it be broken down by a coach into that kind of, you can typically from the outputs see the input that caused it?
From my experience, yeah. I mean, I've become kind of an expert at behavioral patterns and what usually people go through in order to become who they are. And a lot of the men that I see, they're already kind of the hero. They're already kind of the leader. They're executives, they're CEOs, they're the breadwinner of the family, and they just feel like they don't have anywhere to go. And really, what they struggle with is like they've come to this place where they've kind of done everything and they don't feel like they have a purpose. They don't really feel like what the next step is. They don't really feel connected to anyone, even if they have a spouse. Maybe the love, the romance has kind of died. They don't feel appreciated. So we kind of have to work on rebuilding who they feel like they are, because before it was all wrapped up in the money that they made, the position that they held,
Mm.
the family that they had. And now, if that stuff is taken away, they don't know who they are.
So how would you then start identifying what it is that you want in life? I mean, if because I've been in there, oh, I make over 30,000, and there's somebody that makes 130,000. It's, or I wanted the nice car till I realised you're still just paying for four wheels and a car that can only go 60 on a motorway or 70 on a motorway. It's all these nice things that you think you want when you're younger are pointless. What is then the values, or what is the definition of success to these guys that you've worked with? What should you be looking at? How would you start working out what you really want in life? I know it's a big question, but
Right. Well, if they really don't know what they want, we don't focus necessarily on asking the question, what do you want? I get them to focus on who they want to be. So then we start with, what kind of man do you want to be? Because chances are they've never thought about it before. They don't have core values. They don't understand their attachment styles. They don't understand their love languages. So we kind of just build out the core sense of who they are, because when you know who you are, you start to develop who you want to like be in the world, what
mm.
you want to do in the world, as opposed to kind of working backwards, which is like, what do I want to do? Well, then they're identifying once again with just another activity, another passion. But then when that passion runs out, they feel, empty again. So we have to start, filling from the inside out.
Because I love how that's the kind of area that you went, because I've interviewed a lot of guests recently who, have talked about love language, have talked about like how to find your core values and stuff. And I would have been like, yeah, like 20 years ago. Now I'm kind of like, oh, right, let's give me an exercise. Let's see how we do that. And I think a lot of guys are opening up to that you can be who you want to be. And I mean, when I would do that exercise, I would start self sabotaging. The second I would start a new hobby of, say, going to jiu-jitsu, I would stop going because one day I tweaked my knee and I would stop going because the thought of going back because other people would be better than me, I would stop going. Or I would start doing a great new habit at work and I would give up because I got told off or something bad happened. How do we not self sabotage? How do we let this habit? Because I think it's 3 months for a new habit to take success. I know there's a 10,000 hour Malcolm Gladwell belief, etc. But how do we start building a habit and not let self sabotage and fall back on old programming come in the way?
Well, I think the rule of like how long it takes for a habit to come in is just like, it's all just phony baloney, right? The only way a habit sticks is if you have enough discipline to stick with it.
Love it.
That is the one thing that's going to get you through in life. It's not motivation. You don't need to learn how to get more motivated. If you need to learn how to get more motivated, you haven't been in enough pain from the thing you're trying to change yet. Because that's what Tony Robbins says. Pleasure versus pain. We don't run towards pleasure. We run away from pain. So if our situation right now is not painful enough to run away from, run towards the pain of change, then we just haven't suffered enough yet sometimes. Once you learn that lesson, though, I think that you start to become self-motivated and become disciplined enough to make the changes without needing to suffer. And that's what I really try to teach my men. You don't need to get wrapped up in these 10,000 hours or 21 days, because in the second that you hit day 16 and you don't do it, you're like, oh my God, I failed. And then you feel like a failure. And then you're like, well, got to start over again. And it's not till 21 days that I've hit the habit. Or then when you do hit the 21 days, you're like, well, I achieved XYZ goal. And then you fall off again. And the only people who stick to it are the people who say, I'm going to do this no matter what.
So where do you think that discipline comes from then? Is it that you have to find your, a real pain, that what's it they say, that it's like the seesaw, it's the pain is far more heavier than actually staying where you currently are. Do you need to find that point of change, do you think?
I think when people are first starting the journey of self-healing and change, they do, because most people are not inspired or encouraged enough to do it just for the joy. Most people have to hit a rock bottom sort of day in their life where they're like, okay, I really want to start living for me. I really want to do something for me. I'm going to do this because it's something that will help my future self out. I want to get to a better place. You really notice this a lot. Most people don't actually start a diet plan or start to lose weight when they've gained 5, 10, 15, 20 pounds. They do it when it's 40 pounds overweight or
Yeah.
60 pounds or 100 pounds or sometimes 300 pounds. Well, why didn't they start sooner? Because the pain wasn't great enough yet. Every time they gained a new pound, it was a new level of tolerance until they couldn't buckle their seatbelt on a plane. And the same thing goes for mental health. It's fine, it's fine, it's fine. I had a bad day, I had a bad day, I had a bad day. Well, today I thought about killing myself. That was a low point, right? And then you're like, okay, something is wrong. Now I'm suffering a lot.
It's time for a quick break. There are millions of potential products to buy, so how do you know which ones are worth your hard-earned money? Simple. You go to nextlevelguy.com/affiliates and explore those that will transform and improve your life. You'll find deals, listener exclusives, and special offers with some great companies. Recommendations are 100% honest and only on items Ian has tried or believes in. The companies showcased will make you a better man in all areas of your life. Simply go to nextlevelguy.com/affiliates and level up.
I love how the way you look at things, because since I've been listening to your podcast and listening to a lot of your interviews, a lot of things make more sense. It's even stuff that I thought was my part of my improvement. I was like, oh no, maybe should have a look at that. But like you're saying, that these are kind of behaviors that are getting created as we're going on our journey. These are kind of outputs we're putting out as we're growing. They're not necessarily good or bad. They're just keeping us safe and well as much as possible. Something I do, I was at work recently, I work in a university with PhD students. A bunch of students hadn't registered. I took it and I was annoyed that, say, I think it was 20 students hadn't registered. And one of my colleagues said, it's not your fault. They should have done it. They've been notified. And they said, stop taking it so personally. And I mentioned it to somebody and they said, yeah, you do that a lot. You own problems, you take on the kind of acceptance for things that are not your fault, but you kind of take it. And where does that perfectionism come from? Because I see that in a lot of my friends as well. That if it's something that's linked to them, they get annoyed if something bad happens, but it's not their fault. And I do it as well. Where does the search for perfectionism that you won't do something unless it's perfect, so you'll end up not doing something? So, it's not procrastination. You're not lazy. You're just afraid of making a mistake. Where does this perfectionism come from in guys that stops us changing?
Right. Well, Perfectionism and the inability to do something because you're scared are a little bit different, but perfectionism comes from the desire for control, which usually comes from feeling like for a long period of time, you never got to make your own decisions. You were never in control because of outlying circumstances. So, children of divorced families can develop perfectionism because it's just a bid for control. If I do everything right, then life will go my way. If I can do everything perfect, I will never have to be disappointed again. I will never fear being abandoned again. I will never fear being left again. So a lot of men, I don't think a lot of men struggle with perfectionism per se, but when we have bids for control, it's a sign that we just struggled a lot with never being able to feel like we had any control. So you do it as much as possible in your adult life to try to recapture some of that, inner child's need to feel safe. Did that resonate at all?
Definitely. I mean, because it kind of hit home. I was just like, whoa, maybe I do that. So how would you let the control go? Is it literally kind of at the end of the day just switch off and just say, no, I'm not thinking about work? Is it how do we keeping the healing of the inner child, but not actually chasing that control? How do we kind of let that slide? What exercises would you do?
Well, first you have to acknowledge that it's not just as easy as saying, oh, I'm just not going to think about that at the end of the day, because that's just a symptom, right? You're taking things too personally is just a symptom. The
Hmm.
problem is that you constantly feel not in control. And so we have to, once again, we put things in buckets, right? We have to kind of go back. When was the first time I didn't feel in control? Or what, I would say, like, what did your childhood look like? And then they would start telling me, and I would point out little things like, oh, your parents got divorced here. Or, oh, you had a stepmom that you didn't like, and she constantly berated you for doing XYZ. Or you always had to clean your room, or you were grounded, So we start to look at these little things, and then the light bulbs go off.
Yeah.
And then it's like the inner child feels validated from that and understood. And we can reprogram from that moment and say, you know, just because that person wanted you to be a certain way doesn't mean that you needed to be a certain way. It was never your responsibility. You didn't have to take care of mom and dad. You didn't have to be perfect in order to be loved. That's the way that they displayed it. But now that we're in this time period, we can change it and we can accept something different. Usually it's because you've taken on responsibility that was never yours in the first place. So being able to release that and set that free allows you to no longer take responsibility in the present moment for things that are not your job to fix.
I love that. And you said that just previously that there was a difference between perfectionism and not doing something because of fear. What would you say to somebody that's maybe, I don't know, fearful of, say we're in the start of January, people are going to be wanting to try new things, but terrified. Guys are afraid of making a mistake or whatever it is, whatever justification they're telling themselves. How do you overcome that level of fear, that thing that's holding you back?
Right. Usually, if a man is suffering with that, it's a sign of a father wound because the father's representation in, the parent child role is to encourage um, like discipline, leadership, self awareness, self esteem. And so when a man doesn't have a good connection with his father, or doesn't have a good male representation, usually he becomes quite fearful to do anything because his self esteem is so low. The only reason we ever become afraid of doing things is because we feel unsafe or we feel like, we're going to look like an idiot, which also makes us feel unsafe, right? Because then we fear abandonment.
Yeah.
So addressing that is also addressing that father wound, if you have it, depending on, if you connect with that at all. And then the other side is raising the self esteem, which ironically, raising your self esteem becomes doing things that are challenging for you because it makes you feel confident in the fact that you did something that was hard, right? When we just continue to perpetuate the comfort zone, we lose self esteem because we're not being challenged. And then we feel weak because we're not doing anything that pushes us.
So, how would you see a difference between somebody that has a bad relationship with their father or no relationship with a father compared to somebody that had the similar but for their mother? What kind of difference in the type of person would you expect to see in a client?
From what I've seen, and this is not scientific or across the board by any means, whoever's listening to this might feel differently, but from what I've seen, when a man has a bad relationship with his mother, and we're saying either or, sometimes it's both, right? Sometimes we don't have a good relationship with both. But if he has mainly a bad relationship with his mother, usually he turns out a little bit harder, a little bit colder. Because usually, if he has a bad relationship with his mother, she's not emotionally available. And her role is to reflect back emotions, stability, nurturing, caring. So she helps him connect with his soft side. So she's not emotionally available. He doesn't understand the soft side and he hardens. He rejects women. He sees them more as objects. He gets very cold and he really identifies with the things like cars and sleeping with a lot of women as his identity and getting a lot of money, but not necessarily having deep connections or deep relationships.
Hmm.
If he has a bad relationship with his father, usually he turns out a little bit softer. He doesn't have a lot of self confidence, self esteem. He tends to befriend women more than men. He doesn't really do things outside of his comfort zone. He doesn't really go after what he wants.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely a father wound. A saying, listening, yep, you've described me when I was a child. And do you find then that that's the thing is that because we don't deal with these issues, that guys will go and have like an anxious attachment style and they'll go and chase somebody that they can try to fix. So they don't feel like they can fix themselves, so they'll try to fix a partner. So they'll maybe pick a particularly unsuitable partner, or that they'll go for a job in a high stress situation because they want to make somebody proud, because they want the self esteem they never got as a kid. Or do you find that that stems from a massive, like, childhood is the massive, like, dealing with the inner child wounds is a great way to fix your issues you're facing now as an adult?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you have to think that when we're babies, we don't know anything, right?
Hmm.
Human babies are the most useless creatures on the planet. Like, we need our caregivers to survive.
Yeah.
And so when we're born, our only job is getting that caregiver to take care of us. And the only way a caregiver takes care of us is that they have to love us, right? Because if someone doesn't love you and they're dealing with a screaming child every other hour, they're not going to do well, right? They're not going to help you survive. So we adapt to what our caregivers need for them to love us. So it's not about, you're an adult and you're like, oh, I have so many problems. I do this, that, this, that. It's like, you just have to look factually, like, how did you have to survive as a child? That's what you absorbed as your template. Now we just have to rewrite the template to something more adequate to fit the lifestyle that you want. So, exactly like you said, if we don't understand these subconscious patterns, these subconscious templates, we will subconsciously replay our childhood dynamics in adult relationships for the inner child to try to heal that wound. So if he had a bad wound with his mother, he will likely attract someone subconsciously like his mother, or he's going to become his father in that situation. And as an adult, like, we try to solve it, not even consciously. Consciously, we try to avoid it, but we always tend to fall into it because it's a very subconscious primal pattern that we developed.
Makes a lot. I bet you there's a lot of people nodding their heads right now saying, whoa, like the light bulbs are going off. Then how would you start putting in healthy boundaries? I mean, people will be workaholics, alcoholics, they'll be taking, drink, drugs, multitudes of potential bad habits. But how, if we've never confronted people that needed it, if we've never said no, if we've never, taken time for ourselves, whatever it is, how do we start putting in these kind of boundaries and establishing healthy routines? Because you've said about behavioral change, the mind body connection for fixing. But if we don't put sort of reservoirs in, how do we stop the flow of previous programming? If that didn't really work, that analogy, but you know what I mean. How do we put the systems in place to make us able to start changing?
Right. Well, you have to do it step by step. You can't just change, Rome wasn't built in a day. if you have one thing that you don't like, chances are it branches off into another thing like a tree. There are core things that I always tell men to first start off doing, and that's always learn how to self regulate. Self regulating is the act of understanding how your body is responding to the environment, responding to a situation. Because a lot of us try to change things with just our mind. We try to tell ourselves to do something different. We journal, we think about something else, but the body has memories too. Trauma is kept in the body. So you want to make sure that as you're using your brain to do something different, you're also utilizing your body by getting it into a very relaxed position, which means all of the muscles are completely relaxed. Not just, hey, I'm deep breathing and all of my muscles are tense and I'm not paying attention to that. It's like you have to relax every muscle in your body to program it into safety. And once your body feels safe, trauma does not exist. Okay?
Mm.
So if you can start habit by habit also readapting your body to safety, you just adopt that new behavior pattern so much quicker, and your life changes that much faster.
So, is there an exercise you could give, like, obviously, without going too deep into it, because I know you do a lot of amazing coaching techniques, but what would you say to somebody to start using this mind body connection to relax the body, to kind of start letting the body release that tension, that trauma, to allow these changes to happen?
Yeah, well, like you said, there's a lot of different modalities out there. People resonate with different things. They can do breath work, they can do yoga, they can do cold plunges. It's just what gets you into a place of total relaxation for that moment. I like to do something with my clients where it's very quick, and it works really well because sometimes we don't even know where there's tension in our body. We're like, no, I'm fine, I'm relaxed, and you're not really, but you don't know. So what
Yeah.
I always challenge them to do is we do a 30-second exercise where you just tense every single muscle in your body. You squeeze your hands, you squeeze your legs, you squeeze your arms, your abs, your jaw, everything as hard as you possibly can for 30 seconds. And then we take a big deep breath and we release everything. And suddenly you have forced your nervous system into relaxing because it was tensed so long. And it's like an immediate relaxation tool.
I love that. I'm sure I've done a similar exercise, and it really helps that kind of letting it all go. And I think there's so many rabbit holes I'm trying to avoid going down. So apologies for the kind of the widespread of questions, but your main focus is taking pain and turn it into power. How do we look at something and rise above it and not fall? Because if I catch myself, I can go, no, no, that's a bad thought. I'm trying to justify this, or I'm thinking that, like I spoke to somebody who said the reason I think about my ex girlfriend is I'm like a drug addict looking for the high of the emotion she gave me. I'm not missing her. I'm missing the emotional fix of that relationship they gave it to me, and that kind of went, whoa, you know. I changed the story around that, and that helped me so much. But how do we catch that when we are thinking about something and not going into the old programming? When we're shining the light on this pain, how do we avoid falling into the traditional patterns and actually rise above it, if that makes sense?
Right. Well, first, if you can stop identifying as the emotion or thought that you're feeling, you can already start changing the pattern. So instead of saying, I am sad, I am happy, I am depressed, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling happy, I'm feeling depressed.
Mhm.
And a lot of people know this already, but I did Vipassana meditation in India like a long time ago. And the way that they said to look at your emotions is if you're sitting by a river and they're just passing you by, right? Because you have to
Mhm.
think you are not the person, you are not your thoughts, you are the person thinking about your thoughts. You have to give yourself the power back to say like my emotions are not real. They're just they're just momentary directions that my mind is trying to take me or my body is trying to take me, and I can choose a path.
Because I think we did that in headspace meditation. It's similar, it's like a car passing. You just let them drive down the motorway, kind of thing, passing you by. Do you then find, what kind of metrics, or what are we looking for to see how we progress? And when we are changing, how do we take the changes and understand them? Are we should we be looking at, are we happier, healthier, better relationships? How do we measure these things? But also, how do we make sense of them? Should we be journaling our feelings, discussing these with a therapist? How do we make sure that we're on the right path? But also, how do we help us grow by understanding these things that we're changing?
That's such a masculine way to go about healing. It's really funny that you asked that because what are the metrics? How do I know if I'm doing better?
Uh,
How can I measure this? What tasks can I check
as soon
off?
as I
Which
said
is funny, which is
metrics,
why
it's like, that's not a good word to use, but it's something I used to use
no,
for
but it's funny
jujitsu and
because right, because everybody wants to know that they're on the right path, but it's just so funny because when you're talking about mental health and we're talking about emotions and how you feel, when you're talking about metrics, you immediately get out of the feeling space and get into the head space,
yeah,
right? Because you're talking about emotions and feelings, you feel things with your body. You feel things like in your chest, in your stomach. You don't feel a metric. So, how can you possibly judge your progress in the mental health and emotional capacity space with a metric? Doesn't necessarily make sense. However, we can do it, which is why I have something called the 30, 60, 90-day tracker in my Better Man membership. I list off a bunch of things that you can do in the first 30, 60, 90 days. But yeah, things that you can look for, right? How are my conflicts being resolved with my partner, and peacefully or aggressively, right? Like you
mm,
look for little things like this. Am I waking up feeling more energized in the morning, or am I still waking up feeling meh? Do I have a racing mind when I go to sleep, or do I fall asleep instantly? Right? These are little metrics you can look for if you really need them. But in overall, it's kind of like when you're doing a weight loss. I always go to weight loss journey because everybody knows weight loss, right? You can measure how much you weigh every day and look at the numbers go up or down, or you can look in the mirror, right? As a whole. Do I look the way I want to look or not today? So
but
it's like in the beginning, you always need the little metrics to build the momentum. But after that, you don't necessarily need to measure things so compulsively because that is still your bid for control, trying to make sure that you're okay, trying to make sure that you're enough, trying to make sure that you're worthy of feeling okay. By the time I take clients through this, after the first month or so, we stop doing like they don't feel the need to do that anymore because they've come to this self acceptance within themselves of intuitively understanding the path that they're on, trusting themselves, trusting the next move. They don't need to measure it anymore unless we're actually doing a SMART goal as far
yeah,
as their career or their purpose or their passion.
I never thought about that. That's a really good way of of understanding that it is, you try to control it by what data set am I going up? Have I gone up a nudge on, rather than just growing? Yeah, that really hit home. That was kind of
Because then you're continuing to look for things that are wrong with you. This
mhm,
is why I see so many people continue to struggle because they're like, what's next, what's next, what's next? And I'm like, we don't need to find what's next. We need to be able to get you to sit in the moment and understand that you are okay where you're at. It doesn't mean you won't improve, it doesn't mean you won't grow, but when you constantly feel the need to do what's next and improve here and improve there, there's something inside of you that says, I'm not good enough. And you will never reach the point of I'm good enough because you've set an impossible task of perfection.
so. I mean, something I remember in one interview where the guy said, "You're not your thoughts; they're just your brain putting out things based on your biasm, your history, your experiences, or what you previously thought about." And I used to think that what was happening in here was me. Like what was happening in my brain was what I wanted, what I needed, what I was thought about. But a lot of times I kind of go, "What am I thinking? That's just silly." Like almost throw it out my mind, kind of thing. Do you find then that a lot of this stems from the language we use in our internal debates, how we talk to ourselves, how we treat ourselves? Because I remember somebody saying, treat yourself like you treat a lover. You wouldn't put up with that in a relationship. Why would you put it up something to yourself? Is that a problem with a lot of guys? The conversation we have in our heads is a boss rather than a friend.
Well, 100%. And not even a boss, right? Because so many men talk to themselves like, you're so stupid, you're a piece of crap, why would you do that? Such an
Mm.
idiot, should have known better. If your boss is saying those things to you, um, they probably should be fired. I mean, nobody talks to anybody like that, right? But why do we talk to ourselves like that? All it does is continue to keep us in that place. So we do need to change the narrative of who we think we are and what's possible for us in order to start doing things differently.
So if we're kind of holding on to things, to kind of take control because of things that happened in our past, or, you can kind of stem it from that. If you have somebody, I remember somebody emailing me after the Me Too movement saying they were worried they had done something that had offended an ex-partner, or there are all these like the fact that they could tell me, but they couldn't tell their partner, their father, their whoever it was. And I was sitting as this new guy just starting a podcast going, whoa. I couldn't, like, I was amazed at how open people could be. And then I realized I couldn't go and tell my brother the worst thing I'd ever done, but I could tell my mate that I spoke to on a podcast. And that made me realize there's so many guys are in this predicament. What does it mean then if you are holding on to something bad that you did? Is it our ability to beat ourselves up, to create a story or a reason that we're not good enough that stems from something in childhood, this like low self-esteem, this father wound? Or are these kind of things that stem from something else?
Well, if you're holding on to something maybe bad that you did, you haven't told anybody, um, we don't tell people these things because we fear retribution, right? We fear the
Mhm.
consequences. Um, and that can come from an environment that does not encourage personal responsibility, and it can also come from an environment of high shame, like you were shamed for doing something wrong, you could never make a mistake. So when we feel more comfortable telling a stranger than our brother, it's because we feel like our family like our survival is contingent upon our family's acceptance. So we don't care really what a stranger's opinion of us is, because we don't depend on them for survival, and we can choose never to see them again. But someone we have an emotional connection with, that we have to see every day, or that, they're going to be in our lives for the rest of our lives, we don't want to do anything to tarnish our identity or tarnish ourselves in their eyes.
I love that. That's why I'm so glad that there are coaches like yourself out there, because so many guys were like, "Ah, don't be silly, I don't do that." And then as they analyze their lives, they hear somebody else talking and go, I do actually do that in this sense. And they're more willing to open up and learn about that. And I think you're really helping changing guys. I mean, I've seen some of the testimonials. You have such a wealth of support and like love from your clients. But I don't know if you've seen that report where they said that the average, was it something like 60% of men they interviewed, or 72%? Is there something really ridiculously high? Did not have a close friend or a best friend, or said they didn't have more than two friends or somebody they could speak to. What do we do then if we haven't got a support network? For those that don't have their mother in their life, or they have a good friend outside, or even somebody outside of work to help to catch when we're slipping, etc. What do we do in those instances? How do we find that network?
Well, I mean, like you said, you have to find it, right? I didn't have a support network growing up or when I became older, and I had to create it.
Hmm.
We have to take personal responsibility for building our own communities and making our own safety nets. It takes work, but there's a lot of opportunities cropping up, especially for men now as well. When I first started this years ago, there was like nothing for men. And then it became a fad, which is like a really good thing, I think, where now there's like tons of men's retreats, tons of men's communities, men's coaches. And I think that men would be really surprised. And I say this every time. So many of my clients are like, well, my friends aren't like that. They wouldn't, we don't really talk about that stuff. But if so many of my clients are saying that about their friends, it's like everybody's just having this facade. So many men want to talk about deeper issues, don't want to have just surface level relationships, but they're scared to bring it up to their bros because they don't want to be judged or they don't want to be that guy. But I always challenge my clients to be the first one, because they would be so surprised at how wide the arms of the other man gets, like accepting them.
And do you think then that coaching has helped you in your own personal journey when you kind of dealing with these people and help them healing? Do you look back now and understand what happened in your own sort of childhood and upbringing, and have you come to terms with it? Because definitely doing the podcast has really helped me getting to speak to amazing people like yourself and understanding the world and understanding myself better. And I can see such a change in myself. Has coaching helped you? What's the best part of coaching? And do you now think it's helped you grow as a person?
Of course, you can't do this work and not grow as a person. Um, every time I coach a client, I'm coaching myself because I'm reaffirming maybe messages that I needed to hear. And, I can truly say that, like, I just don't feel traumatized anymore. Like, I feel totally over it. I feel grateful. I feel happy. I'm not a person who just struggles with depression and anxiety, even though I have in my life. I've never been one to just continue the identification of that. Um, I live a very stress-free life. I have stressful moments, but I'm not a stressed person, right? So I'm so grateful that these lessons that I've learned, I try to continue to teach to myself so I can give those to my clients. And yeah, like you said, like my clients they're just the best. My followers, my clients, I'm in love with all of them, and it completely changed also the way that I wanted a relationship to be, which was super ironic. Just the way that that turned out, but yeah, it continues to change me.
I love that. That's fantastic to hear because it's a question I always want to ask people, but I always forget to ask it. And and I started asking people recently about like writing books. Does it help them kind of look back at their life and go, oh, that makes sense? I mean, I interviewed Chris Duffin, and he was, they was raised on a bus out in the wilderness, and they didn't have hot water, and he wrote his book about how he got into weightlifting and changed his life, but how he looks back now and understands where his true strength came from and how his tattoos signify his life. And he's such a deep guy. But if you only see him on the powerlifting side, you think he's just this crazy tattooed guy. But he's like such a deep intellectual guy, and reading his book, you understand where he came from. Do you think that's something we all need to do? It's to write down our journey and how we felt and kind of use journals and meditation. And what other habits would you want us to be introducing?
I don't think it's necessary for everybody to write out their story. That's actually a misconception that, like, that's how therapy used to be done. Like in the
Mm,
1950s, they would take people through the worst moments in their life and repeat it, repeat it, repeat it. And they thought they were curing people because they would become numb to it, but actually they were just like desensitizing them, but not curing the trauma. So sometimes if you're doing these exercises alone and you think about what the bad things that happen to you and you're writing them down, all you're doing is reaffirming them to yourself and sometimes re-traumatizing yourself.
no.
So I think even better, the reason why people who write books like that are so successful and why they're able to do it is because I'm guessing that they feel like how I feel now, where when I think back on that memory, I'm not triggered anymore. I don't feel sad. I don't feel happy. I don't really feel any type of way. Like now it just is what it is. And it's such a freeing place to be. But in this place, I don't need to write about it. And I don't honestly want to, because in order to get in that place to explain it, I would get sad again. I would get emotionally triggered again. Um, just like when you were talking about metrics before, a metric to measure, if you've really done the work, is if you do not get triggered anymore by the things that used to make you freak out, by the things that used to make you cry. If you can look at those things and be like, wow, I went through that. That is what it is. I think the next best step, the thing that everybody should really focus on, is just, where do I want to go? And what do I want to do for myself today to help me get there?
I
And
love it.
then before you know it, the past is gone and the future is here, and you're happier than you ever thought you could be. And you didn't have to focus on the bad stuff at all.
And is that what you'd want people doing in the next, say, couple of weeks, month, whatever it is? Like if you were to come back on, say, in 3 months or something like that, what would you want people listening to do? Would it to be literally to go in and try build some decent habits, tackle, to just try to be happier, healthier people and stop trying to, should they be looking in the dark places, or should it just be try to be just happier, healthier people? What would you advise people listening to do as a kind of homework even?
Right. Well, this is something I have as part of my Better Man method, but I would want them to learn how to self regulate, right? Get in touch with your mind and your body, build a community who is a positive influence on you, who's going to be able to support you, and start setting some small promises to yourself, some small goals that you actually keep. Once you start keeping small promises to yourself, your ability to lead, your self confidence, everything about you, you build the momentum for your own self trust. And if you do those three things, your life will be completely different within 3 months.
And I noticed on your website there's a lot of great testimonials about your coaching, about your programs. What would somebody get for signing up with you?
Uh, Besides a complete and total change of their life. I mean, are you looking for the metrics again, Ian?
Oh, you, of course, of course. No, because that's something that's like you mentioned about your support networks and stuff like that. But I want to send because I think your stuff is amazing and you're really helping. Even just tonight, I've had about 15 light bulbs coming. They're going to help me. But what would you want somebody to do now to help? If they came to you as a client, what would you want them to bring or understand or be open about? Or how can we be better patients for people? Maybe not patients, but how can we better be somebody to be coached as a for a coach? How can we come as better clients?
As long as you're someone who takes personal accountability and you're willing to do the work, any program will benefit you, right? But for my program specifically, um, I'm pushing people more away from the one-on-one coaching and more towards the Better Man membership because they have every single Sunday me or an expert come in and do a master class, right? So they have that every Sunday. They have something consistently. And then in between, they have the community. So a bunch of men who are looking to move forward, who have experienced tough times, but who take personal responsibility and hold each other accountable. So they then become the new male mentors that each other needs, new brothers that
Mm.
each other needs, the ones who are going to help each other feel better, do better, and be better for themselves and their communities.
And what would you want this generation to teach the next generation? I mean, I've got two young nephews, and I would love to be the uncle that they go, "Oh, he's coming awesome," rather than like I've had certain uncles where I've gone, "Oh, here we go," and you put up with them, you endure them. I'd love to be the uncle that inspires and motivates. I know that's a father's role as much as that, but how can we help like kids at school, kids like in our lives who in our family? How can we help the next generation? So how can we heal the wounds of today so the future generations are happier, healthier?
Right. Well, exactly what you said. If you can heal the wounds of today, you heal the wounds of tomorrow. Um, don't focus so much on what can we do for them. Focus completely on your own health and happiness, because when you are happy and you trust yourself and you become a leader, you become the male mentor that they look up to.
Mm.
And anybody, whether they have kids or not, is always influencing someone. So the healthier and happier you are inspiring someone just by being. And so the best thing that you can do for the next generation is be as healthy as you possibly can.
How can people find you, keep in touch with you, follow along in your journey?
I'm on any social medias: TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. And if you DM me first month, I have a special offer for you. And I always have free master classes, YouTube videos, everything. I try to offer as much support as possible without anybody having to really be afraid of the cost. And then there are obviously the paid programs as well. So always available for anybody who needs it.
Well, that's it for another week, and thank you for listening. It's now time to take what you've learned and use it to develop and enhance your life with the key points mentioned. Listen, try it, embrace it, use it, and crush it. Now's your time to hit that next level in your life. If you liked this episode, then please leave a comment on the show notes or a review of the show on your podcast platform. Everything helps evolve the show. Until next week, keep seeking the next level in your life.